Can Africa finally break free from the chains of foreign influence and redefine its place in the global order? Burkina Faso's recent speech at the UN has made waves around the world. But is this the start of a new chapter for the continent? The United Nations General Assembly is known for being a platform where global leaders come together to address the most pressing issues of our time. But how many speeches truly make an impact? How many voices actually dare to disrupt the status quo and challenge the world's most powerful nations? In this year's assembly, one such voice emerged, not from a major power, but from a small West African country, Burkina Faso. In a world dominated by the voices of those who hold power, wealth, and influence, it's rare to see a country like Burkina Faso command attention on a global stage. Historically, African nations have been seen as passive participants, bound by the expectations of international donors, and wary of stepping out of line. But things are changing, and Burkina Faso is leading the charge with a message that no one can ignore. The speech, delivered by Minister of State Bassolma Bazi on behalf of President Ibrahim Traoré, wasn't just a formality. It was a call to action, a rallying cry for Africa to stand up and speak out against the systemic inequalities that have kept the continent under the thumb of foreign powers for far too long. The world watched in shock as Bazi, with unwavering confidence, called out the hypocrisy of global powers and exposed the deep-rooted exploitation of African resources. He addressed issues that many leaders have been hesitant to discuss in public: the influence of neo-colonials, the impact of foreign military interventions, and the need for African nations to reclaim their sovereignty. The question on everyone's mind now is, can Africa really rise against these odds? Or is this speech just another fleeting moment in the complex world of international politics? Bazi's speech took a bold approach right from the start. He began by quoting four prominent figures to set the tone for his address, each statement reflecting a profound critique of the current global order. He painted a vivid picture of a world turned upside down, where the wealthy bask in luxury while the impoverished struggle to survive. This striking imagery wasn't just meant to shock, it was a deliberate indictment of a global system that prioritizes profit over human dignity. Bodies litter the beaches where billionaires bask. He began, emphasizing the grotesque disparity between those who benefit from the world's resources and those who are left to suffer. The audience was immediately captivated. His second citation underscored the urgency of the crossroads humanity faces, where decisions made today will shape the world we leave for future generations. He stressed that what is lacking is not the capability to solve these issues, but the political will to do so. His third quote pointed to the paralysis within global institutions like the UN, which have become platforms for empty rhetoric rather than meaningful action. And finally, Bazi condemned the dissonance between the principles these institutions claim to uphold and the reality of their actions. By referencing the UN Security Council's failure to address critical issues in a world of supposed solidarity and justice, he challenged the organization's credibility and called for genuine reform. It was clear from the beginning that this was not going to be a typical speech. Bazi was there to speak truth to power, and he was unafraid to call out the disparities and contradictions that have plagued the African continent for decades. One of the most poignant segments of the speech was Bazi's critique of the Western powers' involvement in Libya. He pointed to the catastrophic flooding that recently devastated the country, claiming thousands of lives. Bazi argued that while the international community offers hollow expressions of solidarity, true justice would require acknowledging the root causes of such disasters. He linked the current instability in Libya to the 2011 NATO intervention, led by France and endorsed by the UN's Resolution 1970. According to Bazi, this intervention, which culminated in the assassination of Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, set the stage for Libya's ongoing turmoil. Libya is not just a victim of nature's wrath. It's a victim of man's greed and ambition, Bazi proclaimed. He didn't shy away from naming the Western powers he believed were responsible for the chaos, accusing them of using the language of democracy and human rights to justify what he called an imperialist agenda. He demanded that the international community offer more than just words. He called for a sincere apology to the Libyan people and reparations for the destruction wrought upon their country. Bazi then turned his attention to Niger, a neighboring country that has also been grappling with political instability and the threat of foreign intervention. He warned that Niger could become the next Libya if the international community continues to impose its will on the region without regard for the voices of its people. He criticized what he described as great diplomatic hypocrisy, which, in his view, prioritizes geopolitical interests over human lives. This theme of external interference was a recurring motif throughout the speech. Bazi was particularly scathing in his critique of the UN's handling of Niger's situation, noting that the exclusion of Niger's legitimate leaders from the General Assembly was a blatant act of manipulation by powerful nations. He called for the African Union and the UN to transform into true organizations of the people rather than tools wielded by a few heads of state to destabilize neighboring countries and eliminate their leaders. Bazi's speech was not just a denunciation of external powers, but also a rallying cry for African unity. He urged the people of Africa, especially those in the Sahel region, to unite against the forces seeking to control and exploit their continent. He specifically called on the citizens of Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Chad, and other Sahelian nations to stand together in solidarity. The minister's words struck a chord because they resonated with the broader frustrations of many African nations. These countries have often found themselves at the mercy of foreign powers that profess support while simultaneously undermining their sovereignty. In this regard, Bazi's speech was a powerful affirmation of Africa's right to self-determination. But Bazi's critique did not stop at political and military interventions. He also took aim at the economic exploitation of Africa's vast resources. He cited the presence of 10,000 foreign soldiers in the Sahel region, mostly French, but also American, German, and Italian. Who have failed to curb the rise of terrorist activities despite their advanced military capabilities. Bazi posed a provocative question: who is truly responsible for arming, feeding, and training these terrorists? He argued that the real motive behind the foreign military presence was not to help stabilize the region, but to maintain control over its rich natural resources. He traced this exploitation back to the creation of the Common Organization of the Sahelian Region, OCRS, by France in 1957. This organization, which brought together parts of Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Mauritania, and Algeria, was established not out of goodwill, but as a means to tap into the region's immense reserves of oil, uranium, gold, cobalt, and other valuable minerals. Even today, he suggested, the presence of these resources, including the world's largest underground water table, is the true reason behind the continued foreign interest in the Sahel. Bazi's speech didn't shy away from addressing Africa's lack of representation in international bodies. He questioned why, despite being the second largest continent by population with 54 countries, Africa is still denied a permanent seat on the UN Security Council, or veto power. He called this exclusion a state crime and condemned it as a continuation of the West's paternalistic attitude towards Africa. As the speech drew to a close, Bazi made a passionate appeal to the international community to transform its institutions so they truly serve all nations, not just a select few. He emphasized that the inefficiency and insincerity of these organizations have contributed to the instability and coup plaguing Africa today. Will the world recognize Africa's worth and allow it to grow on its own terms, or will it continue to bind us in chains of dependency and subjugation? Bazi asked, leaving the audience to ponder the future of the continent. With these powerful words, Bazi concluded his address, leaving a lasting impression on all who listened. His speech was not just a defense of Burkina Faso's interests, but a call for a new chapter in Africa's history, one where the continent is free to chart its own course, unencumbered by the weight of foreign control. Thanks for staying glued to our channel. Please don't hesitate to like, share, and subscribe for more insightful reports from Africa. See you when we drop our next video.